And if you think about Hitler, it's not just because he's a great speaker. He absolutely understood his audience, which was every single veteran of the German army in World War I, which was the most proud army in Europe before and after World War I, the best, man for man in terms of skill, the greatest traditions. They felt betrayed by the fact that Germany had never been invaded, but their leaders had stopped the war. And they felt like it wasn't their fault that they'd lost, and their pride was wounded. And Hitler just understood better than anyone, because he came from those ranks, the pain of his audience and the story that they wanted to hear, which is make Germany great again. Some scary echoes right now of some other politics going on in the world. And he said, this is how we're going to do it. I mean, the construct I'm going to teach in the next 3 lessons is nothing new. It's understanding your audience, telling them that, hey, I get your pain. I understand exactly what's upsetting you. Here's how it can be, how we can change it, and here's how we're going to do it. And unfortunately for the world, that causes the Second World War. You have great filmmaking in World War II, propaganda films that really have a big impact. Hollywood, the film industry in America, grows out of a American recognition that they needed to get into this information warfare game, this battle of ideas. And the great film industries, there's so much technology involved in these things. Perfect weather needs to be there. You need good lighting. You need hugely expensive equipment. And only great nationally sponsored and subsidized film industries can produce works of art that connect with people. So a lot of the consolidation of power during this time and bigger countries comes from this information dominance that, England's never going to have a great film industry compared to Hollywood or America because one, there's a wealth issue, but two, like the weather's never good in England. And, you can see why America rose up as this great cultural imperialist, I guess, the great purveyor of ideas that it still is today through its movies and other things. And this is really just a reconsolidation, which had been a long march in the industrial era of reconsolidating control of narrative. For 1,000 years, the Catholic Church owned the narrative, and it maintained a bit of control based on that. It was broken for about 350 years from the era of the printing press through the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And then you see the Industrial Revolution reconsolidate it. And that remains with us in the Cold War after World War II. You have the Soviets and you have the Americans competing for this great 2 ideologies left standing out of World War II. Obviously, National Socialism had lost in between the idea of communism and democracy. But there are 2 great ideologies left that divided the globe in terms of influence. And depending on what part of Europe you sit in right now, or what part of the globe even, which side that your country fell in this battle of ideas, which is capitalism and democratically organized societies, free markets versus centralized control, classless societies, Marxist ideology, and which one of these was a better organizing principle for society. And as we know, in the 1989, the Berlin Wall fell here in Poland. The first free elections were held. Really, Poland was instrumental in breaking up the Soviet Union's grip on Eastern Europe. And then we get to this period of great freedom. The world is now free, and everyone's going to become democratic and peaceful. And as we know, that hasn't happened. And one of the great sources of turbulence now in this era has been what I call the second great disruption in information history, which is we've killed the gatekeepers again. And you and I sitting here on this podcast without having to go through CBS or NBC or BBC to publish a radio show and reach out directly to our audience is emblematic of the fact that the internet has absolutely destroyed the gatekeepers. And that's caused a huge amount of turbulence. First of all, blogging, rises up, and anyone can publish anything and people can find it. And if you have an idea that's worth spreading, it will get shared. And the rise of Facebook and social media has only amplified the ease with which great ideas only, great stories can spread like wildfire. Then there's obviously rise of podcasts, which breaks up the radio industry. And we're sitting here obviously as part of that movement. And that was one of the earlier technologies that were released in the age of the internet. Then you have the video wave, and YouTube comes along, and Google buys YouTube, and YouTube starts to get into live streaming. Then Facebook gets in the game of video. Now Facebook's really going after YouTube for dominance in the world of video eyeballs and views, and I think Facebook's winning that right now. And we find ourselves now where anyone out there can publish a story and no one can control whether or not it gets distributed. And the gatekeepers, the publishing houses are dying, the print publishing houses are dying. The radio stations are having a hard time keeping up with all the different podcasts that are moving out there. And same thing on YouTube. Now you have influencers coming out of nowhere. Paddy, you're one of them who had no publisher tell them that they had a right to be on air and say what they were saying. And they just came up with a story that connected with an audience. So it's never been easier to get your information out there. And if you look back at history, the consequences of that are not all rosy. In fact, it was quite a turbulent period of world history for 350 years when the printing press came in and destroyed the gatekeeper of information distribution and production, which was the Catholic Church. So the really fascinating thing that I find right now is what the current era is going to bring in terms of the fact that everyone can tell stories, and the implication of that is quite daunting. It's exciting, but it's also can be a bit daunting when you look back at the history of how information has affected everything in our lives.